I helped him get promoted, then he stabbed me in the back. I've been working at this company for over 10 years. It's not the kind of place where you'll find your name in lights or get recognized for your work in a big way, but it's stable. And stability was something I valued more than anything else. Over the years, I built a solid reputation. People came to me when they needed help, and I never hesitated to lend a hand. Whether it was staying late to finish a project or just offering advice, I was there for my colleagues. One of the people I helped the most was Eric. We started around the same time, and for a long while we were more than just co-workers. We were friends, not just office buddies, but actual friends. Our families would hang out together on weekends, going on trips, barbecuing in the backyard. I knew his kids by name and he knew mine. We shared stories about our lives, our frustrations, our victories. We were a team not just at work, but in life. That's why when Eric came to me with a request a few years ago, I didn't hesitate. He was up for a promotion, but there was a bottleneck in the process. The higher-ups weren't convinced he had what it took, and he asked me if I could help. He wanted me to vouch for him, to put in a good word with our manager to back him up. And I did. I told them how much potential he had, how hard he worked. I even took on extra work to free up time for him, knowing it would make him look better to the powers that be. I didn't mind. It was what friends do for each other, right? The promotion came through and Eric was on top of the world. He was practically glowing with pride, and I was happy for him. Of course, a part of me wondered whether this would change things. You hear stories about people getting power and letting it go to their heads, but I pushed that thought aside. He was my friend. That was what mattered. But slowly things started to shift. At first, it was little things. He stopped hanging out as much outside of work. The dinners, the weekend get-togethers, they started to become less frequent. I didn't think too much of it at first. People get busy, right? He had new responsibilities, new challenges. I figured it was just a natural part of his growth. Then came the emails. No more casual messages during the day, no more checking in. He didn't need advice anymore. It wasn't like before, when we would talk about work stuff and personal stuff in the same breath. The connection we had started to fray around the edges. I noticed that I was the one reaching out now. Hey Eric, you free for lunch this week? Or we should catch up soon, buddy. But the responses were always delayed short. The friendly banter was gone. It wasn't that he was being rude, he just wasn't the same person anymore. And it hurt, but I told myself it was just a phase. Maybe the promotion was just a lot for him to handle. Then months later, the first real sign of a problem came. I ran into him at the coffee machine one morning and there was something different about him. He was distant, his eyes colder. He barely made eye contact. And when I asked him how things were going with the new role, he just nodded and said, "Good, busy, you know how it is." But there was something in his tone that didn't sit right with me. It wasn't like before when we'd dive into those long conversations about work, about life. Now it was just surface level. I pushed it out of my mind, telling myself I was being paranoid. A few weeks later, I heard from Mark. Mark's a good guy, but he's always been more of an observer than a talker. He's the type to sit back and let the chaos unfold around him. But when he spoke, people listened. And when he pulled me aside at lunch one day, I knew it wasn't just small talk. "You know Eric, right?" he asked, looking around the cafeteria like he was checking to see if anyone was listening. "He's been talking to HR about you." I laughed, not knowing whether he was joking or serious. "What do you mean, talking about me?" Mark sighed and rubbed his temples. "I don't know the details, man, but it's not good. He's pushing for you to be let go. He says you're a liability now." A pit formed in my stomach. It felt like the ground beneath me was crumbling. "What the hell are you talking about? That's crazy. We're friends." Mark shook his head, his voice dropping lower. "I know, I didn't want to believe it either, but trust me, man, I'm telling you what I've heard. He's done with you. He's got what he wanted." I sat there in stunned silence. It wasn't anger I felt at first, it was disbelief. How could he do this? How could Eric, someone I had helped so much, someone I considered a friend, do this to me? After everything we'd been through, after all the late nights and early mornings, after all the sacrifices I made for his success, this is how he repaid me. But the truth settled in like a ton of bricks. I had been naive. The promotion had changed him, yes, but it wasn't just about the promotion. It was about what came with it, the power, the money. It had gotten to him in ways I never saw coming. And the worst part, he wasn't even man enough to tell me to my face. After Mark's words hit me, the rest of the day felt like a haze. It was like everything around me was muffled. Voices, the clatter of keyboards, the hum of the fluorescent lights above. I could feel my heart pounding in my chest, but I couldn't seem to focus on anything but the words that kept looping in my head. "Eric, done with you. He's pushing you out." I didn't know what to do. I didn't want to believe it. This can't be real, I kept thinking. Eric wouldn't do this. Not after everything we've been through. But the doubt had already planted itself in my mind, and no matter how many times I tried to push it away, it kept growing, feeding on every moment that felt off between us. I spent the rest of the day in a daze, answering emails and pretending to be busy, but my mind was constantly going back to that conversation with Mark. Eric, the guy I'd spent years helping, who I'd gone above and beyond for, was turning against me. It didn't make sense. Or maybe it did. Maybe I had been too blind to see the signs earlier. That night I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying everything, trying to find the moment where it all shifted. But there wasn't one. It wasn't a dramatic change, it was slow, insidious. First, it was the missed phone calls, the cancelled hangouts. Then it was the shift in his tone when we talked at work. Busy, you know how it is. He was always busy. But so was I. We used to make time for each other. Now it felt like I was just another task on his ever-growing to-do list. I kept telling myself I was overthinking it, that maybe I was just being paranoid. But deep down, I knew the promotion had changed him. Or maybe it was the power. Maybe it was the money. Whatever it was, I wasn't the friend he once knew anymore. The next morning, I went to work early, hoping the quiet would give me some clarity. I sat at my desk, staring at the computer screen, but nothing was making sense. I tried to focus on the tasks at hand, but my thoughts kept drifting back to Eric. I knew I had to talk to him. I needed answers. But how do you confront a friend who's already turned their back on you? Mid-morning, I saw him in the hallway. He was walking toward me, his face expressionless, like he didn't even see me. I had to force myself not to stop him. No, I told myself, this isn't how it's going to be. You're not going to let this slide. You need to talk to him. I caught up with him as he was about to enter the break room. Hey, Eric, I said, my voice sounding stronger than I felt. Can we talk for a minute? He froze for a moment, then turned to face me. There was a flicker of recognition in his eyes, but it was quickly replaced with something else. Indifference, maybe. Coldness. Sure, he said flatly. We walked to a quieter part of the office, and I could feel the tension building between us. I wanted to ask him everything, why, how, what happened to us, but the words wouldn't come. Instead, I just stood there, watching him, trying to make sense of the person standing in front of me. You've been distant lately, I said finally, my voice steady but not without a hint of frustration. I don't get it. We used to be close. We used to talk about everything. Eric sighed, crossing his arms over his chest. It's just work, man. Things change. His tone was curt, as if this was all normal, like nothing had happened, like nothing was wrong. That's not it, Eric, I said, my voice rising just slightly. It's more than that. You've been pulling away, and I know something's up. What's going on? He didn't answer right away, just stared at me like he was weighing his options. Then, with a shrug, he said, You wouldn't understand. Things are different now. That hit me like a slap to the face. I wouldn't understand. I was the one who'd been there for him when nobody else was. I was the one who'd gone out of my way to help him get ahead. And now he was telling me I wouldn't understand. But I couldn't say anything. I had to let it go, at least for now. I wasn't ready to hear whatever it was he had to say. It felt like there was a wall between us now, and the worst part was, I didn't know if it was one I could break down. I guess that's it then, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I turned away before I could say anything more, before the hurt could show. As I walked back to my desk, I could feel the weight of the conversation sitting heavily on my chest. I had the answers I needed, but they didn't make anything easier. The days following that conversation with Eric felt like a blur. I didn't know what I expected, but I definitely wasn't prepared for the cold indifference he showed me. I kept telling myself that it was just a rough patch, that things would blow over, but deep down I knew this wasn't just a bump in the road. This was it. This was the moment everything changed. Every time I passed him in the office, it was like we were strangers. We didn't even make eye contact anymore. Our casual chats had turned into awkward silences, and even when we were forced to talk about work, there was an underlying tension, a discomfort neither of us could ignore. But the worst part, I couldn't shake the feeling that I had been played, that all those years of friendship, all the times I had supported him, meant nothing. Maybe he had just been using me all along. Maybe he had always been after that promotion, and I was just a stepping stone on his path. That thought stung more than I'd care to admit. I spent my nights trying to understand what went wrong, trying to figure out if I had missed something, if there were signs I'd ignored. Had I really been that blind? I kept replaying every moment, every conversation. Nothing seemed to add up, but one thing did become clear. Eric had changed. He wasn't the guy I once called my best friend. And as much as I hated to admit it, I wasn't sure I even wanted to keep fighting for that friendship. If he was willing to throw it all away for a promotion, for power, then maybe it wasn't worth saving. At work, things got progressively worse. The tension between us grew more palpable. I started to feel like I was walking on eggshells around him, never knowing when the next awkward encounter would occur. Even the little things started bothering me, like how he'd make decisions without consulting me, or how he'd leave me out of meetings we used to attend together. It was as if he'd already mentally written me off. Then came the day I realized I had no choice but to face the truth. I was sitting at my desk, the usual morning routine of checking emails and reviewing reports, when I got a call from HR. It was an odd time for them to call, and I immediately felt my stomach drop. Had I done something wrong? Hi, this is Amanda from HR. I just wanted to touch base with you about your performance review. We've been noticing some issues with your productivity, and we need to discuss some changes moving forward. My heart raced as I tried to keep my composure. Productivity issues. I'd been busting my ass at work. Sure, the past couple of weeks had been tough with everything going on with Eric, but I never thought it would affect my work performance. Is this his doing? I couldn't help but wonder if Eric had somehow played a part in this. Maybe he'd gone to HR with his concerns, or maybe he'd just been silently pushing me out. Either way, I couldn't shake the feeling that this was just another consequence of the mess he'd dragged me into. I've been doing my best, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. I know there's been some tension recently, but I don't think that's affected my work. You'll need to see some improvement in the next few weeks, Amanda said, her tone polite but firm. We're going to put you on a performance improvement plan to help you get back on track. Please make sure you take this seriously. The call ended and I sat there staring at the screen, my mind racing. Performance improvement plan. I had been with this company for over a decade. I had earned my place here. But now, everything felt like it was slipping away, like my hard work had somehow been erased by a few weeks of tension with Eric. I didn't know what to do anymore. It wasn't just about the promotion or the money anymore. It was about my pride, my career, and my sense of self. How had everything come to this? That night, I finally decided to confront Eric again. I couldn't keep running from this, couldn't keep pretending like everything was fine. I needed to hear him say it. I needed to hear him admit that he was the one who'd pushed me out. I called him, and after a few rings, he picked up. Yeah, his voice was as cold as it had been the last time we spoke. We need to talk, I said, my tone more firm than I intended. About everything. I don't understand why you've been acting this way. If there's something I've done, I need to know. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. I don't know what you want from me, man, Eric finally replied. Things are different now. I can't help you if you're not going to help yourself. That was it, the final straw. I had been trying to make sense of this, trying to find a reason, but this was it. He was done with me. And if he was done, then maybe it was time for me to be done too. I think we're done, Eric, I said, my voice surprisingly steady. I think it's time I move on, from you, from this place. I hung up before he could respond, and for the first time in weeks I felt a strange sense of relief. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't hurt. I was just done. I spent the next few days in a haze. My mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, but every time I tried to focus on something specific, the only thing that came to mind was what now? What was I supposed to do with myself now that the foundation of my career and friendships had cracked and crumbled around me? It's a strange feeling, realizing that everything you thought you knew about your life was no longer true, that the people you trusted most, the ones who'd been with you for years, could so easily turn their backs on you. Eric was the catalyst for all this chaos, but now I had to figure out how to move forward with or without him. I didn't want to stay at the company anymore, but there was a part of me that feared jumping ship too quickly. I had put over a decade into this place. I'd been through ups and downs with this job, seen coworkers come and go, watched the industry shift and evolve. My professional identity was wrapped up in this company and my role, but now it all felt tainted. The trust was gone. I spent a lot of time thinking about the what-ifs. What if I left? What if I stayed? It was a tug-of-war between comfort and risk. There was something secure about staying, about riding out the storm. But it was becoming increasingly clear that my happiness here was tied to the friendships I'd lost, and without them, what was left? At the weekend, I decided I couldn't just wait around for things to get better. I had spent too many years treading water, too many years allowing myself to be caught in a web of toxic loyalty. And if there was anything I had learned from my interactions with Eric, it was that sometimes, the best thing for your mental health and growth is to walk away from what you know, to embrace uncertainty. I sat at my kitchen table, a cup of coffee cooling beside me, staring at the same laptop I had used to work for the last 10 years. What now? I had been thinking about my future for months, even before everything with Eric fell apart. And now, with the clarity that came from being pushed to the brink, I knew it was time to make a change. I opened up my email and started drafting a resignation letter. The resignation letter was short and to the point, a simple thank you for the opportunities and a formal notice of my intent to leave. I didn't go into the details of why. I didn't need to. It wasn't about Eric anymore. It was about my own personal journey, and that had nothing to do with the petty drama that had consumed the last few months. After clicking send, I sat back in my chair, staring at the screen. There it was, the end of an era. And while there was a part of me that felt the weight of the decision, there was another part of me that felt free. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't bogged down by the office politics, by the toxic atmosphere, by the dead-end path I had been on. I could finally breathe. But with that freedom came uncertainty. What next? I didn't have a clear answer. I didn't have another job lined up, nor did I know what kind of work I wanted to pursue. All I knew was that I needed to take a break, to reset. I needed to get out of this environment before I completely lost myself in it. Over the next few weeks, I focused on me. I took time off, went on a few short trips to clear my head and started reading again, something I hadn't done in years. I reconnected with old friends, the ones I'd lost touch with while I was buried in work. I even started working out again, a habit I had neglected for far too long. And through all of that, I began to remember who I was outside of my job. I wasn't just a cog in the corporate machine. I had passions, interests, and goals that had nothing to do with spreadsheets and meetings. I didn't rush into anything after quitting. I didn't force myself to have all the answers right away. For the first time in a long time, I gave myself permission to be uncertain, to be in a place of transition. I didn't have to have it all figured out, and that was okay. Then, about 2 months into my break, I got a call from an old colleague who had moved to a different company. She knew I had left my job and offered me a role in her new team. It was a completely different direction, one that I hadn't considered before. It was creative work, the kind of job that would challenge me in new ways, and for the first time in a while, I felt excited. I wasn't sure if I was ready for this kind of change, but I decided to go for it. Why not? Life was about taking risks, stepping out of your comfort zone, and after everything I'd been through, I realized it was time to take the leap. As I signed the offer letter and prepared for my first day at this new job, I couldn't help but feel a sense of accomplishment. It wasn't just about the new role, it was about the fact that I had taken control of my own narrative. I had stepped away from the situation with Eric, left the toxic environment, and made a decision that was best for me. I was no longer letting external circumstances dictate my happiness. And maybe that's what this whole experience had been about. It wasn't just about Eric or the job or the fallout. It was about learning to stand up for myself, about recognizing my worth outside of my professional identity. It was about understanding that I could build a life on my own terms, without relying on anyone else for validation. It was a small step, but it was the beginning of something new. And as I walked into my first day at the new company, I knew that I was finally on the path to becoming the person I was always meant to be. Pour 8 drama, friendship gone wrong, trust issues.